never would have believed that at 60 years old, I would discover myself sitting alone in my car, just outside my son's home, with absolutely no place else I could think to go. Yet there I was gazing intently at the darkened windows of the old farmhouse, where my son James resided with his wife Vanessa. The tears tracing paths down my cheeks were caught and briefly illuminated only by the faint, almost melancholic glow of my dashboard lights. It was hard to fathom, but a mere 12 hours prior, my life had seemed remarkably stable and secure. I had a husband of 35 years by my side, a beautiful and comfortable home nestled in the heart of Riverside, and a deeply held certainty that my children, James and his sister Emily, would always be readily available to support and care for me. Now, all that remained was a hastily packed suitcase shoved unceremoniously into the trunk of my car, and the utterly devastating realization that the entire foundation of what I had believed to be a solid, unchanging life had in fact completely crumbled and fallen apart in the span of a single brutal day. Before we delve deeper into this unexpected turn of events, I'd appreciate it if you'd let us know where you are watching or listening from today. And please, if this story touches your heart in any way, make absolutely certain you hit that subscribe button. I've deliberately saved something particularly special and meaningful for you that I plan to share tomorrow. The day everything changed dawned like any other crisp Tuesday morning in October. The maple trees just outside our bedroom window, a view I had grown to cherish deeply over 30 beautiful autumns spent in our familiar Riverside home, had only recently begun their vibrant transformation, shifting into brilliant fiery shades of orange, red, and gold. I was comfortably seated at the kitchen island, slowly sipping my morning coffee, and happily engrossed in planning the details for our upcoming Thanksgiving dinner, a holiday I always looked forward to hosting more than any other. Rob, my husband, was noticeably quiet, an unusual state for him. He was meticulously spreading peanut butter onto his toast, his gaze deliberately averted, avoiding any direct eye contact with me. "I've been thinking," I said, attempting to break the heavy silence that hung between us. "Perhaps we should invite Vanessa's parents this year. James mentioned they might not have any specific plans, and it really would be lovely to spend some more time getting to know them better." Rob simply nodded distractedly, still not looking up from his task. "Whatever you want to do, Maggie." He mumbled, his voice flat and lacking its usual warmth. There was something about his tone, an emptiness or a forced calmness, that made me pause instinctively. After 35 years of sharing a life, a person develops an almost sixth sense, an ear tuned to the subtle nuances and unspoken feelings that lie beneath the surface of everyday conversation. "Is everything all right?" I asked carefully, placing my coffee mug back down on the counter. He finally lifted his head. His blue eyes, usually so expressive, seemed unreadable behind his glasses. "We need to talk, Maggie," he said, his voice low and serious. "But not right now. Tonight, after dinner." A sudden, inexplicable chill snaked through me, despite the comforting warmth of the kitchen. Those 3 simple words, "we need to talk," are almost universally understood as harbingers of bad news, never anything good. Yet I simply nodded, forcing a small, hopeful smile onto my face. "Okay," I replied softly. "Tonight then." I spent the remainder of the day trapped in a disorienting fog of anxiety, my mind replaying possible scenarios. I tried to distract myself by compulsively cleaning the house, which was already perfectly spotless, and rearranging flowers that didn't need rearranging. By mid-afternoon, the waiting became unbearable, an almost physical ache. I decided somewhat impulsively to drive out to visit James and Vanessa at their farmhouse located on the outskirts of town. My official reason was to discuss Thanksgiving arrangements, But honestly, my primary goal was simply to distract myself from the ominous conversation looming later that evening. The drive to their place usually had a calming effect on me. The winding country roads, the sight of horses grazing peacefully in sun-drenched pastures, the distant outline of the mountains against the sky. It was normally a source of peace. But today my knuckles were white as I gripped the steering wheel, my mind frantically racing with terrifying possibilities about what Rob might want to discuss. Retirement plans, health issues, or something far, far worse. As I pulled into James and Vanessa's long gravel driveway, I immediately noticed several unfamiliar cars parked outside. Was they having company? I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should have perhaps called ahead, but then I decided to go ahead and surprise them. I had brought along some fresh apple cider and delicious cinnamon donuts from the local farmer's market, a perfect seasonal autumn treat I knew they both loved. I walked up to their front door and knocked awkwardly, balancing the jugs of cider and the box of pastries in one arm. From inside the house, I could clearly hear sounds of laughter and the cheerful clinking of glasses, indicating some sort of gathering was in progress. James opened the door, his initial welcoming expression quickly shifting to one of obvious surprise, and then strangely to something that closely resembled discomfort. "Mom." He said the word coming out sounding more like a question than a greeting. "What are you doing here?" "I was just in the neighborhood," I said brightly, trying to maintain a cheerful demeanor and holding up my offerings. "Thought I'd drop by with some treats. Is this a bad time?" Before he had a chance to respond, a woman appeared standing directly beside him. It wasn't Vanessa, but someone older though, with eyes and a smile that were unmistakably similar to Vanessa's. It was her mother, Carol, whom I had only met once briefly at the wedding 2 years prior. "Margaret, isn't it?" Carol said, her voice pleasant enough, but with a distinct undertone of coolness. What an unexpected surprise. "Maggie, please," I gently corrected, offering what I hoped was a warm smile. "I didn't realize you were in town visiting." "Oh yes, we've actually been here for almost a week now," she replied conversationally. "David and I are here helping the kids get everything ready for the arrival." "The arrival," I repeated, feeling a wave of confusion wash over me. James cleared his throat awkwardly, exchanging a quick, meaningful look with his mother-in-law. "Vanessa's pregnant, Mom," he announced, his voice slightly strained. "We were planning to tell you and Dad this coming weekend." The news, which should have instantly filled me with overwhelming joy at the prospect of becoming a grandmother, instead brought a strange hollow ache to my chest. A week. They had known about the pregnancy for at least a week, had even had Vanessa's parents here helping them prepare, and they hadn't thought to tell me the expectant grandmother. That's truly wonderful news," I managed to say desperately, attempting to hide the hurt and disappointment I felt. Why didn't you call? I would have." "It's just been really hectic, Mom," James interrupted quickly, not quite meeting my eyes. "Vanessa's been feeling pretty sick with morning sickness, and we've been busy setting up the nursery." "I could have helped with that," I said softly, the words feeling inadequate and a little pathetic. An awkward silence fell heavily between the three of us, broken only when Vanessa herself appeared in the hallway behind them, her hand resting lightly and protectively on her still flat stomach. "Maggie," she said, her voice strained with an attempt at forced cheerfulness. "What a surprise to see you." Looking past them, I could clearly see the dining room table beautifully set, with Vanessa's best china, the elegant set I had helped her choose after the wedding. Wine glasses were filled, candles were lit, and it looked very much like a celebration was already in full swing. "I'm so sorry," I said, the realization finally dawning on me with painful clarity. "You're having a dinner party. I really should have called first to check." "It's just a small gathering," Vanessa quickly explained, though her explanation only underscored my unwelcome intrusion. "My parents, my sister, and her husband." The implication hung heavy in the air between us. This was a family celebration. Their family, not including me. "I should go," I said, forcing a smile as I handed the box of donuts and the cider to James. "Please enjoy these, and congratulations again on the baby. That's just such genuinely wonderful news." As I turned to leave, walking back toward the front door, Carol's voice stopped me. "Why don't you join us, Margaret? There's certainly plenty of food." It was clearly a courtesy offer, nothing more extended out of politeness, rather than genuine invitation. Her cool tone made that abundantly clear, and James's expression, a mixture of obligation and palpable discomfort, only served to confirm it. No, I really couldn't intrude," I said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "Rob is waiting for me at home. We actually have dinner plans ourselves. I just wanted to drop these things off." It was a complete fabrication, a lie, but it served its purpose, allowing me to maintain a shred of dignity in a moment that felt entirely undignified. As I walked back down the gravel driveway to my car, I distinctly heard the front door close softly behind me, followed by the immediate resumption of the laughter and conversation from inside, as if I had never even interrupted their evening. And that right there was when the very first crack appeared in the solid world. I thought I inhabited a small, almost imperceptible fissure that I would soon discover was destined to become a vast and terrifying chasm. On the drive back home, my vision became increasingly blurred with unshed tears. It wasn't simply the sting of being excluded from their dinner party, or even the painful realization that I had learned about my first grandchild's impending arrival almost as an afterthought. It was the sudden stark understanding that in my son's newly formed life, a life he was building with his wife and her family, I was rapidly becoming peripheral, slowly relegated to the role of an outsider looking in. By the time I finally pulled into our familiar driveway, the sun was beginning its descent, casting long stretching shadows across our front lawn. Rob's car was already parked there, which was unusual. He typically worked late on Tuesdays. Stepping inside, I found him sitting quietly at the kitchen table, a glass of whiskey in front of him. Another oddity. Rob rarely, if ever, drank hard liquor, especially not on a weeknight. "You're home early," I commented, setting my purse down on the counter. "I came home specifically to talk," he replied, his voice steady, yet undeniably strained. "Where were you?" "I went out to see James and Vanessa," I said, sinking into the chair directly across from him. "Did you know that Vanessa is pregnant and that her parents have been in town for an entire week, already helping them get the nursery set up?" Rob showed no visible reaction to the news, nor to the raw, obvious hurt in my voice. Instead, he took a slow, deliberate sip of his whiskey, carefully set the glass down, and looked me directly in the eyes. "Maggie," he began, his voice low and deliberate, "I want a divorce." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and impossible to unhear. I stared at him, my mind struggling to process the syllables. I must have misunderstood him completely. "What?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I've been thinking about this for a very long time." He continued each word, precise, almost rehearsed, as if he had practiced this moment countless times. "I'm not happy, Maggie. I haven't been for years now. And honestly, I don't believe you are truly happy either." "That is absolutely not true," I protested vehemently, my voice rising with disbelief and pain. "We've been fine. We've been good. 35 years, Rob. Think about it. 35 years of building a life together, brick by brick." He shook his head slowly, a gesture of sad finality. "We've been coexisting," he corrected softly. "Not truly living. Not really living at all. I want something more than this, Maggie. And I honestly think deep down you do too. Is it because I spend too much time with the children?" I asked, desperately clutching at straws. "Because I volunteer too much at the community center, I can cut back. We can travel more. We can finally take those river cruises you've always talked about wanting to go on." "It's not about what you do or don't do," he interrupted, his voice maddeningly calm, frustratingly detached. "It's about what I feel, or more accurately, what I simply don't feel anymore." As he spoke, I finally noticed details I had been too shocked and distracted to see clearly when I first entered the house. A suitcase standing upright near the door, his jacket neatly draped over it, car keys placed deliberately on the small side table. "You're leaving," I said, the terrifying realization dawning on me. "Tonight," he confirmed with a small nod. "I've found an apartment downtown. I'll come back later this week to collect the rest of my things." "An apartment?" I repeated numbly, struggling to grasp the implications. "How long? How long have you actually been planning this?" He hesitated for a moment, then quietly admitted, "I signed the lease on the apartment 3 weeks ago." 3 weeks? While I had been happily planning our Thanksgiving menu, excitedly ordering new decorations for the living room, and genuinely thinking about our future together, he had been quietly, methodically planning his departure, his exit strategy from our shared life. Is there someone else?" The question slipped out raw and unplanned before I could possibly stop it. "No," he said firmly, and part of me desperately wanted to believe him. "This isn't about another woman, Maggie. This is about me. It's about me needing to find out who I am, truly am outside of the confines of this marriage before it feels like it's simply too late to do so." The sheer cliché of a midlife crisis would have been almost laughably absurd if it wasn't in that very moment brutally and irrevocably destroying my life in real time. "You're 62 years old, Rob," I retorted, my voice filled with pain and sarcasm. "You know exactly who you are by now." "That's precisely it," he said, shaking his head slowly. "I don't think I do. I've been Rob Wilson, the accountant, the husband, the father for so long that I honestly feel like I've completely lost track of who Rob Wilson actually is, what he genuinely wants, what truly makes him happy." "And you honestly think abandoning your family is going to help you figure that out?" My voice was rising now, a wave of anger finally beginning to cut through the suffocating blanket of shock. "I'm not abandoning anyone," he stated firmly, meeting my gaze directly. "James and Emily are adults now. They have their own lives, their own families." Preparing and narrating this emotionally demanding story took us a significant amount of time and effort. So if you are finding yourself deeply engrossed in it, please consider showing your support by subscribing to our channel. It genuinely means a great deal to us and helps us create more content like this. Now let's get back to the unfolding story. And I'm certainly not abandoning you either, Maggie. I'm just changing our arrangement. Our arrangement? I echoed the word, feeling utterly foreign and offensive when applied to 35 years of shared history. That's what you call 35 years of marriage, an arrangement. He sighed a heavy, weary sound and finished the remaining whiskey in his glass in a single gulp. I knew you wouldn't understand this. You're right, I don't understand. I cried out, the tears finally spilling over hot and unstoppable. I absolutely do not understand how you can possibly throw away 3 entire decades of building a life together, a shared history, without even making the slightest attempt to fix whatever it is you think is broken between us. There's nothing left to fix, Maggie. He said, his voice flat and final. That's what I'm desperately trying to tell you. It's not broken. It's just over. At least it's over for me. With those crushing words, he stood up, grabbed his jacket and the suitcase that stood by the door, and simply walked out. Just like that. 35 years of marriage, of shared dreams and daily routines, ended in a conversation that lasted barely 10 minutes. I remained seated at the kitchen table for a very long time after his car had disappeared down the street, my mind frantically trying to make some semblance of sense of what had just occurred. 2 devastating bombshells dropped in a single day. My son was starting his own family, a significant life event without even including me in the initial joy or preparations. And my husband, my partner for over 3 decades, had walked out of my life without any warning whatsoever. My world, the stable, predictable world I had known, felt like it was rapidly collapsing around me, and I had absolutely no idea how I could possibly stop it. In the overwhelming quiet of our suddenly too large, too empty house, I reached for my phone. I needed to talk to someone, anyone. More specifically, I desperately needed my children. With shaking fingers, I called James. When he answered, I could still clearly hear the sounds of the dinner party continuing in the background, laughter, music playing softly, the clinking of glasses. "Mom," he said, his voice immediately sounding concerned as he registered my distress. Is everything okay?" I tried my best to keep my voice steady to control the tremor of emotion within it. "Your father. He just left me. He says he wants a divorce." The background noise on James's end quickly diminished, suggesting he had moved to a quieter room away from the guests. "What, Mom, are you serious?" He had a suitcase already packed. I explained, my voice thick with tears. "He's already rented an apartment downtown. I just don't know what to do, James. I don't think I can possibly be alone in this house tonight. Can I come and stay with you? Just for tonight?" There was a long, agonizing pause. A pause that felt far too long, followed by some muffled conversation I couldn't quite make out, on his end. "Mom," he finally said, his voice gentle but unmistakably firm. "I really don't think that's a very good idea right now. We've got Vanessa's family here staying with us, and you know how small the guest room is already, especially with all the baby stuff we've accumulated." I honestly couldn't believe what I was hearing, what he was saying. "James," I pleaded, my voice rising slightly in desperation. "I'm not asking to move in with you. I just need somewhere to go tonight. I can sleep perfectly fine on the couch. I just can't be in this house, our house, alone right now." Another pause followed, more muffled conversation in the background. "Well," he said, his tone suggesting this was a more practical solution. "Then what about Emily? Have you called her?" "She's an hour's drive away." I reminded him, the distance suddenly feeling insurmountable. "And she has the kids to take care of, and she has work tomorrow morning." "Mom," he said, his voice softening again, though still lacking the immediate instinctive urgency I craved. "I am truly sorry about Dad. That's absolutely awful news. But tonight is it's really not good timing for us. Maybe tomorrow. Vanessa's parents are staying here through the entire weekend, but maybe we could figure something else out sometime after that." I ended the call abruptly before he could finish his sentence. The pain of his rejection, added on top of the devastation of Rob leaving, was simply too much to bear in that moment. My husband had just left me after 35 years, and my son, my firstborn, had chosen his in-laws and their family celebration over his own mother in her desperate moment of crisis. Suddenly, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think clearly, couldn't possibly stay in that house for another second. I grabbed my purse, not even bothering to pack a single bag, and drove. With no specific destination in mind, I just drove the car carrying me aimlessly through the darkening streets. Eventually, I found myself parked right back outside James and Vanessa's farmhouse, watching the warm, inviting glow of their windows, seeing the blurred silhouettes of people moving about inside, laughing, celebrating, while I sat utterly alone in the dark, my life in complete and utter shambles around me. And that's precisely where I am now, still sitting here in my car watching the life I suddenly feel no longer a part of through windows that might as well be a million miles away. My son's words echoed cruelly in my ears. Tonight is just not good timing. I wondered with a bitter ache if he truly realized there is never, ever a good time. For your entire world to fall apart, never a convenient moment to face the terrifying, daunting prospect of having to start your life completely over again at the age of 60. As I sat there in the quiet darkness, a strange, unexpected calm began to slowly replace the frantic panic that had consumed me. Perhaps it was simply shock, my system shutting down in response to the overload of pain. Perhaps it was the very first stirrings of acceptance, a quiet resignation to the new reality. Or perhaps, just perhaps it was the first fragile stirring of something else entirely, the quiet, dawning realization that if my family could so easily and readily move on without me, perhaps it was finally time for me to learn to move on without them. I reached for the ignition and started the car. It was time to go. Not back to the empty, silent house that had once been my home, the center of my universe, but somewhere else, somewhere new. I had absolutely no idea where I was going yet, but for the first time in decades, the decision felt entirely exhilaratingly and terrifyingly my own. That night, true to my impulse, I did not go back to the house that had been the center of my world for 3 decades. I simply couldn't bear to face the overwhelming emptiness within its walls. Instead, I drove to the Riverside Inn, a rather modest and unassuming hotel situated on the edge of town, a place where I felt confident no one who knew me would ever think to look. The young woman working at the front desk barely cast a second glance at my tear-stained face as she politely handed me the keycard to room 214, a small mercy for which I was profoundly grateful. The room itself was clean but utterly impersonal. The walls were painted a bland beige generic landscape. Art hung over the bed, and the bed itself was covered with 2 stiff, uninviting sheets. I sat down gingerly on the very edge of the mattress, still wearing my coat, and stared numbly at my reflection in the mirror, positioned across the room. A 60-year-old woman with smudged mascara, disheveled gray-streaked hair, and eyes that looked far older than her years stared back at me. She looked like a stranger. In my hasty, unplanned exit from the house, I hadn't packed anything at all. I had nothing with me but the clothes I was wearing, and my purse. No toothbrush, no comfortable nightgown, no change of clothes for the following day. The practical problems of my new sudden reality were already beginning to pile up small inconveniences that felt distant and almost irrelevant compared to the sheer emotional earthquake that had just violently destroyed the familiar landscape of my life. My phone buzzed softly on the bed beside me. It was Emily, my daughter. She must have heard from James by now. "Mom." Her voice was tight with immediate concern when I answered the call. "Where are you? James just called me. He said Dad left and you just took off." "I'm fine." I lied, surprised by how steady my voice sounded despite the turmoil inside me. "I'm just at a hotel in town. I just needed some space to think everything through." "A hotel, Mom? That's absolutely ridiculous. You should have called me right away. You should have come here." "You're an hour away, Emily." I reminded her gently. "And you have the kids to get to school and work tomorrow. It's fine, really. I'll be okay." She sighed a sound so deeply familiar, so like her father's weary sigh that it made my chest ache with a fresh wave of pain. What exactly happened with Dad James was pretty vague about the details. "He wants a divorce." I stated flatly, the words feeling heavy and unreal as I spoke them aloud. "Apparently, he's been planning it quietly for weeks. He already has an apartment rented downtown." I heard a sharp intake of breath on her end of the line. "Oh, Mom, I am so incredibly sorry. But why didn't you just stay at James's? He said you called him, but then just hung up on him." The memory of my son's rejection stung afresh, a sharp, unwelcome pain. He didn't want me there." I said the words, quiet but firm. "They have company. Vanessa's parents are staying with them." "Oh, Mom, I'm sure he didn't mean—" "He meant it, Emily." I interrupted suddenly, too tired, too emotionally drained for any kind of pretense or sugarcoating. "He made it very, very clear that I would be an inconvenience to them at that moment." "That really doesn't sound like James," she said, her voice filled with disbelief. "No." I countered the bitterness creeping into my tone. "Did you know that Vanessa is pregnant? Did you know that her parents have been in town for an entire week, helping them set up the nursery? Because I just found out today, completely by accident, by showing up uninvited to their dinner party." There was another pause, a long one, too long. Then softly, "Yes, Mom, I knew. James told me last weekend." The sense of betrayal cut deep, a sharp, unexpected wound. "I see," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "And you didn't think to tell me that I was going to be a grandmother." "He asked me not to, Mom," she explained quickly, almost pleadingly. "He said they specifically wanted to tell you and Dad together in person." "Well," I said, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "Vanessa's entire family already knew about it and was celebrating it. Some things, I guess, never truly change, do they?" What do you mean by that, Mom?" I closed my eyes for a moment, suddenly overwhelmed by a flood of memories that had been bubbling just beneath the surface, painful recollections stretching back years. "Do you remember?" I began, my voice low, "when James graduated from college, how he invited Meredith's parents, his girlfriend at the time, to stay at our house. But we had to put you in a hotel because there wasn't enough room for everyone." Meredith had been James's college girlfriend, a relationship that had ended relatively shortly after graduation, but the memory and the hurt associated with it was still vivid and sharp. "Mom, that was years ago." Emily protested gently, trying to steer me away from the painful past. "Or his law school graduation dinner." I continued, the memories flowing now unstoppable. How he intentionally seated us at a different table from his roommates and their families. Or his wedding, where Vanessa's parents were deeply involved in literally every single decision. But I was simply told not to worry about a thing, that everything was taken care of. "Mom, that's not fair." Emily's voice rose in immediate defense of her brother. "Vanessa is their only daughter. Of course they wanted to be fully involved in her wedding. And I I said quietly, my voice heavy with years of unspoken pain. Am his only mother, but somehow that has never seemed to matter very much to him. The line went silent. I could almost visualize Emily's frown, the way she would worry the ends of her hair, a nervous habit she had had since childhood, whenever she felt conflicted or unsure. Mom, she finally said, her voice softer now, filled with compassion. I think you've had a terrible shock. 2 terrible shocks, actually. You're not thinking clearly right now. Why don't I come and get you tomorrow morning after I drop the kids off at school? You can come and stay with us for a few days. The offer was genuinely kind, heartfelt, and I knew she meant it, but something deep inside me resisted the idea. I truly appreciate that, honey, I said, but I think I need some time completely alone first, to process everything that's happened, to just be. Are you absolutely sure I really don't like the idea of you being all alone in a hotel room? I'm 60, Emily. I reminded her, attempting a lightness I didn't remotely feel. Not 90. I'll be fine, I promise. I'll call you tomorrow. After we hung up, I finally managed to take off my coat and shoes and lay back on the hotel bed, staring blankly at the textured ceiling above me. My mind felt like a chaotic carousel of memories, spinning faster and faster, not just recent disappointments, but a clear pattern stretching back years, decades even. How many times had I rearranged my entire schedule, sacrificed my own plans to accommodate Rob's unexpected work emergencies? How many school plays, music recitals, and sporting events had I attended completely alone because he couldn't manage to get away from the office? How many promised vacations had been cancelled or endlessly postponed because something always came up? And James, my firstborn, the son I had doted on, whose needs I had always instinctively put first. When had he started pulling away? When had I, his mother, become an afterthought in his life? Someone he only remembered when it was convenient or required. I vividly remembered his high school graduation, how he had seemed genuinely embarrassed when I tried to hug him in front of his friends, how he had quickly moved away to stand with them for photos, leaving me standing awkwardly and alone until Rob finally arrived, late as usual, just as the ceremony was concluding. Or college move-in day, when he had practically ushered us out of his dorm room, clearly eager for us to leave so he could finally start his new life without any parental supervision or interference. I had cried the entire hour-long drive home that day, and Rob had simply patted my hand absently, telling me it was natural, that children grow up and move on. At the time, I had accepted these moments as simply normal phases of life, the inevitable process of letting go that all parents must eventually face. But now, lying in this anonymous hotel room with my entire life in shambles around me, I saw them through a different, clearer lens. They weren't isolated incidents. They were undeniable waypoints on a map, a clear, unwavering path leading directly to this specific moment of complete and utter rejection. The realization brought a fresh wave of tears, but also a strange, unexpected clarity. This hadn't just happened overnight. The very foundation of my most important family relationships had been slowly crumbling for years, steadily eroded by neglect, not just their neglect of me, but perhaps, if I was truly honest, my own neglect of myself as well. I had been so utterly consumed with being the perfect wife, the tirelessly supportive mother, the dependable, unwavering backbone of our family, that I had completely failed to notice how insubstantial, how fragile those roles had actually become. My phone buzzed again, startling me slightly. A text message from James this time. Mom, just checking to make sure you're okay. Emily said you're at a hotel. Let me know if you need anything at all. The formal politeness of his message, the careful distance embedded in his words, told me everything I needed to know. He was checking the box of filial concern, performing the expected duty, without actually offering any meaningful practical help. I didn't reply. Instead, I forced myself to get up from the bed and walk into the bathroom. The harsh fluorescent light fixture above the sink was unforgiving, cruelly highlighting every line and shadow on my face, every sign of strain and exhaustion. I looked significantly older than my 60 years tonight, tired, defeated, lost. I washed my face with the tiny rough bar of hotel soap, scrubbing away the remnants of my makeup and the visible salt tracks left by my tears. Without my usual familiar skincare products, my skin felt tight and dry afterward. Another small, annoying discomfort added to a day already overflowing, with much larger ones. As I was drying my face with a rough hotel towel, my wedding ring, the gold band that had been on my finger for 35 years, caught on a loose thread. I stared intently at the familiar band. It suddenly felt foreign, heavy, like an artifact, unearthed from someone else's life entirely. In a sudden, impulsive, decisive movement, I twisted it off my finger and placed it carefully on the bathroom counter. The pale indentation it left behind on my skin was a faint ghost of the life I had so long believed was irrevocably mine. Back in the bedroom, I realized with a pang of dismay that I had absolutely nothing to sleep in. After a moment's hesitant consideration, I stripped down to my underwear and slipped between the crisp, unfamiliar sheets, shivering slightly despite the room's adequate heating. I hadn't slept alone in a strange bed since before I had even met Rob. Sleep predictably eluded me completely. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Rob's face, his flat, emotionless expression, as he told me he was leaving, or James's uncomfortable, averted gaze as he refused to let me stay, or the vivid, painful image of Vanessa's parents and sister gathered around the dinner table, laughing and celebrating the news of a grandchild, while I remained in complete ignorance, shut out from their joy. By morning, I had managed to doze for perhaps an hour or two at the very most. My eyes felt gritty and sore, and my entire body ached from the emotional and physical tension of the previous day. The hotel room looked even more depressing and unwelcoming in the cold, unforgiving light of day, the beige walls seeming sallow and dull, the carpet stained in places I hadn't noticed the night before. I reluctantly put on yesterday's wrinkled clothes, grimacing at the rumples, and attempted to make myself look somewhat presentable, using only my fingers to comb my hair. The result was less than impressive, but it would simply have to suffice. I desperately needed basic toiletries, a change of clothes, and most importantly, a plan. The hotel offered a very basic continental breakfast buffet, which I forced myself to eat despite having absolutely no appetite whatsoever. Coffee at least was a blessing, and I savored 2 hot cups while I quietly considered my limited options. I couldn't possibly stay at the hotel indefinitely. It was far too expensive, and besides, I desperately needed my things, my belongings from the house. Going back home was inevitable, a necessary step, but the very thought of it made my stomach clench with dread. Not yet. I wasn't ready to face that empty, silent house just yet. My phone, which I had deliberately left on silent overnight, showed a flurry of missed calls and text messages when I finally checked it. 2 more calls from James, their tone increasingly concerned. 3 from Emily, verging on frantic, and 1 from Rob curt and purely practical. "We need to talk about next steps regarding the divorce. Call me when you're ready to discuss." None of them felt urgent enough to respond to immediately. Instead, I drove to the nearest department store and purchased the absolute essentials: toiletries, underwear, a simple change of clothes, simple practical items chosen with little thought beyond immediate necessity. In the past, shopping had sometimes been a pleasure, a small, enjoyable indulgence. Today it was just another chore to be completed, another problem to be solved. Returning to the hotel, I showered and changed into my new clothes, feeling marginally more human and capable afterward. My phone continued to buzz occasionally with incoming messages, but I ignored them all. For the first time in decades, I realized I was answering to no one but myself. The freedom felt terrifying. Around noon, a sudden knock at my door startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone. Cautiously, I peered through the peephole and saw Emily standing in the hallway, her expression a clear mixture of worry and determined resolve. I unlocked the door and opened it. How did you find me here?" I asked, surprised. "I called literally every single hotel in Riverside." She admitted, gently pushing past me into the room. "8 calls, Mom. You were at the 8th hotel I tried." Her effort touched me deeply, though I wasn't ready to admit it aloud. "I told you I needed some time alone to process things. And I decided that was a terrible idea," she countered, taking in the sparse, anonymous hotel room with a critical, disapproving eye. "Mom, this is ridiculous. Please pack your things. You're coming home with me to my house." "I don't have anything to pack, Emily," I said, gesturing toward the small shopping bag containing my minimal purchases. "And I'm not coming home with you right now. I genuinely appreciate the offer, honey, but no." She looked genuinely confused and slightly hurt by my refusal. "But why not? You can't possibly stay here in this place." "Actually," I replied, my tone sharper than I had intended, causing Emily to flinch slightly. "I can. I am a 60-year-old adult woman with a working credit card and the capability to make my own decisions about where I stay." "I know that, Mom," she insisted. I just want to help you." I softened my tone, remembering that she was hurting too. Her own father had just walked out, and her family was fracturing in ways none of us had ever imagined possible. "I know you do, sweetheart," I said gently, "but the best way you can help me right now is to respect that I desperately need some space to figure things out on my own." She sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping under her weight. "Dad called me this morning," she said, her voice quiet. My heart clenched painfully. "Oh, he's worried about you, Mom. He said you weren't answering his calls. I'm not ready to talk to him yet," I stated firmly. "He says it's important, Mom. Something about finances, making absolutely sure you have access to everything you need." Of course, practical Rob, ever the accountant, making sure all the boxes were methodically checked, even as he systematically dismantled our entire life together. "I'll call him when I'm ready to discuss practicalities." Emily sighed, running a hand through her hair in frustration, mirroring Rob's earlier gesture. "This isn't like you at all, Mom. Hiding out in a hotel, ignoring calls, refusing help when you clearly need it. You've always been the one who holds absolutely everything together for everyone." Her words struck a nerve, hitting me deep in the core. "Maybe," I said softly, the realization dawning on me, "maybe that's precisely the problem." What do you mean, Mom?" I sat down beside her on the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by an urgent need to make her understand, truly understand. "All these years," I began, my voice low and raw with emotion, "I've been the one tirelessly making everything work for everyone else, planning all the holidays, maintaining the house, keeping up with everyone's busy schedules, remembering every single birthday, organizing family gatherings big and small. Even after you and James were grown up and had left home, I was still the one who made absolutely sure we all stayed connected, who did the work of being a family. I called constantly. I visited regularly. I arranged everything. And somewhere along the way, it stopped being appreciated. It just became expected, invisible, like breathing air. Emily looked visibly uncomfortable, shifting slightly on the bed. That's not true, is it, Mom? When I asked, my voice gentle but pointed, was the last time your father called you just to check in, not because of a specific task or plan, but just to see how you were doing? Or when was the last time James came by the house simply because he wanted to see me, not because he was specifically invited for an occasion? When was the last time anyone else in this family did the active, ongoing work of maintaining our relationships except for me? She had no immediate answer, and her silence was answer enough. And now, I continued, my voice catching slightly with emotion. Now that I am the one who desperately needs support, who needs someone else to step up and hold things together. For a change, what happens? Your father simply walks out. Your brother turns me away. And you are here, yes, and I am so grateful for that, but even you are already trying to fit me neatly into a plan to fix the problem, to restore the status quo, to make everything go back to the way it was. Mom, that's not fair to me, Emily protested, tears filling her eyes. By taking me to your house, I explained, my voice softening, where I would sleep in your guest room, constantly trying not to disrupt your family's routine, putting on a brave face for your children, pretending everything is fine when it is anything but, where I would feel obligated to be Grandma Maggie, instead of just Maggie, a woman whose entire life has just brutally imploded. Is that so terrible, Mom? She asked, her voice small and hurt. No, I admitted, reaching out to take her hand and squeezing it gently. No, honey, it's not terrible at all. It's incredibly kind, and I love you so very much for offering it. But it's simply not what I need right now. It's not what I need to heal. Then what do you need, Mom? She asked, her grip tightening on my hand. Just tell me, and I'll do it. I looked at her, my heart overflowing with love for this woman I had raised. I need time, I said. Time to myself. Time to figure out who I am now, without your father, without the roles that have defined me completely for so long. I need to face squarely what has happened and decide entirely on my own terms what comes next for me. She wiped at her eyes with her free hand, nodding slowly. I'm scared for you, Mom, she whispered. I know, I said, offering a small, sad smile. I'm scared too, honey. But maybe that's okay. Maybe it's finally time that I felt something real, truly real, even if that feeling is frightening. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, hands clasped tightly between us. Finally, Emily spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. I had no idea you were unhappy, Mom. The statement caught me completely off guard. I wasn't exactly unhappy, I clarified, choosing my words carefully. I was comfortable, content even. But I think I stopped expecting anything more than that a very long time ago. I settled. And Dad, she asked, her gaze searching mine. Did he stop expecting more too? I considered the question thoughtfully. I honestly don't know, Emily. We never really talked about it, and I think that's a significant part of the problem. Somewhere along the way, we simply stopped truly talking to each other. We talked about schedules and bills and whose turn it was to call the plumber about the leaky faucet. But we never really talked about what we wanted from life, about what truly made us happy, or sad, or afraid. That sounds terribly lonely, Mom, Emily said softly. I admitted the full weight of the realization settling over me, even as I spoke the words aloud. It is. I've been lonely for a very, very long time. The truth of it felt heavy like a thick, suffocating blanket. Despite being surrounded by my family, despite the constant activity of maintaining our lives and relationships, I had been profoundly, utterly alone within my marriage. Rob and I had been living essentially parallel lives, moving in the same general direction, but never truly intersecting on a deeper level. And my children had grown up, created their own vibrant worlds where I was always welcome as an occasional visitor but never felt like a full, indispensable participant. I should have noticed, Mom, Emily said, squeezing my hand again. I'm so sorry that I didn't. It's not your job to notice, honey, I replied gently. I'm the parent, remember? My job was to make sure you were okay. But you are also a person, Mom, she said, her voice earnest, with your own needs and feelings that matter just as much as anyone else's. Her words, so simple yet so profound in that moment, brought fresh tears to my eyes. When was the last time anyone, including myself, had genuinely acknowledged that? Thank you for saying that, Emily, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. Emily stayed for a while longer. We talked truly, talked in a way we hadn't in years about her marriage, the joys and challenges of raising her children, her work as a third-grade teacher, and about my own fears for the uncertain future, and her worries for my well-being. It was honest, raw, and at times incredibly painful, but it felt like the very first, real, genuine connection I had experienced in longer than I could even remember. When she finally left, promising to call me again that evening, I felt both emotionally drained and strangely energized. A significant weight had been lifted, not the entire heavy burden of my situation. Certainly not. But a substantial portion of it had dissipated, replaced by a fragile sense of hope. I spent the remainder of the day in quiet reflection, sometimes allowing myself to cry freely, sometimes jotting down scattered thoughts and feelings in the small notepad thoughtfully provided by the hotel. By evening, I had reached several important conclusions. Firstly, I needed to go home. Not back to the physical house I had shared with Rob that didn't feel like home anymore, but to myself, to the woman I had been, or perhaps was meant to be, before I became Mrs. Robert Wilson. Before I was defined solely as Mom or Grandma or any of the other roles that had so completely consumed my identity. Secondly, I needed to be utterly honest with myself, with my family, and with everyone else in my life. No more swallowing my hurt or my words to keep the peace or make others comfortable. No more pretending everything was perfectly fine when it clearly wasn't. And thirdly, I needed to rebuild not just my external life circumstances, finding a new place to live, or managing finances, but my entire sense of self, my inherent worth as a person, independent of what I could do for others. I called Rob that evening, keeping the conversation deliberately brief and strictly focused on practicalities. Yes, I was safe. No, I did not want to meet with him yet to discuss the intricate details of the divorce settlement. Yes, I would be returning to the house the following day to collect some of my belongings. No, I did not expect him to be there when I did so. He sounded visibly relieved that I wasn't completely falling apart, which only served to confirm my growing suspicion that he had in fact expected me to, that he had mentally prepared himself for hysterics, for begging for the emotional collapse of the woman who had always been perceived as the stable, unwavering center of our family. The fact that I was managing to hold myself together to function seemed to unsettle him more profoundly than if I had been a complete wreck. Good, I thought, with a sudden surge of defiant energy. Let him be unsettled. Let him wonder what else he might have completely misjudged about me. I called James next. The conversation was stiff formal, in a way that conversations with one's child should, ideally, never be. "I'm fine, James," I assured him before he even had a chance to ask the expected question. "I just wanted to let you know that I'll be finding a more permanent place to live soon. A fresh start." "Mom, you don't have to leave your house," he protested, still clinging to the old reality. "Dad is the one who chose to walk out." "It's not my house anymore, James," I said, simply echoing the quiet realization I'd had earlier. "It hasn't truly been for a very long time. It's just a place where I used to live." Where will you go then?" he asked, sounding genuinely lost. "I don't know yet," I admitted truthfully. "I'm considering my options, exploring possibilities." There was a pause on his end. "Mom, I am sorry about the other night, truly. I know I should have handled it much better. It was just bad timing." The apology felt perfunctory, offered out of a sense of obligation rather than deep, genuine remorse. I could almost picture him in my mind, phone held to his ear, one eye, simultaneously on whatever else he was doing in that moment. "Yes, James." I agreed, not making it easy for him, not letting him off the hook. "You absolutely should have handled it better. But it showed me something incredibly important. So, in a way, I'm actually grateful for it." What do you mean, Mom?" There was an edge of defensiveness creeping into his voice now. "I mean, I explained, choosing my words carefully, that sometimes we desperately need to see the truth clearly, starkly, before we can possibly move forward. And now I see it. See what, Mom? That I have been living my life entirely for other people for so long. I said the realization firm within me that I completely forgot to live it for myself. That I have been pouring my entire heart and energy into relationships that perhaps didn't truly value it in return. That I have been willingly settling for crumbs when in fact I deserved a feast. Mom, that's not fair. We do love you," he protested, his voice rising. "I know you do, James," I said, softening my tone slightly. "In your own way. But love isn't just a feeling you hold in your heart. It's actions. It's showing up for someone when they desperately need you. It's actively making room in your busy life for them. Not just when it's easy and convenient, but especially crucially when it's not. You're talking about the other night," he said, his voice tight. I already explained that it was bad timing. "It's never really been good timing for me in your life, has it, James?" I asked, my voice quiet but firm. "Not really. Not when it mattered most." His silence was telling a silent admission. "I am not saying all of this to hurt you." I continued, reiterating my intention. "I am saying it because it is true, and because both of us, you and I, deserve to hear and acknowledge the truth. I deserve to finally acknowledge it for myself, and you deserve to hear it even if it's difficult." So what happens now, Mom?" he asked, his voice still tight with emotion. "Are you just going to disappear from our lives? Just start a brand new life without us in it?" "No," I replied, my voice calm and measured. "I am going to start a new life for myself. Whether you and your father are a part of that new life depends entirely on both of you. The door will certainly be open, James, but I won't be standing anxiously in the doorway anymore, waiting and hoping and wishing for you to step through it. I will be actively living my life, and you will both be genuinely welcome in it if you choose to be there on new terms, on terms of mutual respect and valuing." After we hung up the phone, I felt a strange, complex mixture of sadness and profound liberation. The conversation had been undeniably difficult, raw and painful, but it felt necessary, a crucial first step toward whatever unknown future lay ahead. I made one final call that night to a realtor I had met previously through my volunteer work at the community center. Karen was a woman around my own age who had gone through a divorce herself about 10 years prior and had successfully reinvented her life after her marriage ended. She answered on the second ring. "Maggie, what a lovely surprise. How are you doing?" she asked, her voice warm and friendly. "Actually," I began the words, still feeling somewhat strange and unfamiliar on my tongue. "I'm getting divorced, Karen, and I desperately need a new place to live. Something small just for me. I was really hoping you might have some ideas or suggestions." There was a brief understanding pause on her end. Then Karen's voice immediately warmed with genuine empathy and understanding. "Oh, honey, I am so incredibly sorry to hear that. And yes, absolutely, of course I have ideas. In fact, I might just have the absolute perfect place for you. How about I pick you up tomorrow morning and we can go take a look?" For the first time in 2 long, emotionally draining days, I felt a small flicker of genuine excitement, a spark of hope. That would be wonderful, Karen," I said, my voice filled with gratitude. "Great," she replied cheerfully. "And afterward, we'll definitely have lunch, and you can tell me absolutely everything or absolutely nothing at all, whatever you feel like you need in that moment." After we said our goodbyes, I sat on the hotel bed, staring intently at the small notepad where I had been jotting down my thoughts. On a fresh, clean page, I deliberately wrote 3 words: recognition of patterns. Below that, I began to create a list detailing all the ways in which I had allowed myself to become invisible, faded into the background of my own life. All the times I had consciously swallowed my hurt, my words, my needs, in order to keep the peace. All the relationships where I had consistently given far more of myself than I had ever received in return. All the dreams and aspirations I had willingly set aside for the convenience or comfort of others. The list grew longer than I had initially expected. By the time I finally finished writing, 2 hours had passed, and my hand was cramped from holding the pen, but my mind felt clearer, lighter than it had in years. I carefully tore out the pages and folded them neatly, placing them securely in my purse. Then I turned out the light and lay down to sleep. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I didn't set an alarm. Tomorrow would arrive when it arrived, and I would face it, whatever it brought, entirely on my own terms. For tonight, that was enough. Karen arrived promptly at the hotel at 10:00 the following morning, her silver SUV gleaming brightly in the pale autumn sunlight. She greeted me with a warm, unexpected hug that caught me slightly off guard. We had been friendly acquaintances through our volunteer work, but never truly close. Yet in that moment, I found myself leaning into the embrace, feeling starved for genuine, uncomplicated human connection. "You know," she said, stepping back slightly to assess me with kind but shrewd eyes, "you actually look a lot better than I expected you to. When my ex-husband left me, I honestly didn't even brush my hair for an entire week. I laughed despite myself, a real spontaneous laugh. Please don't be too overly impressed," I said, a smile still playing on my lips. "I literally bought these clothes yesterday at Target, and this is honestly the absolute best I could possibly do, with only hotel shampoo and no conditioner." "Well," she replied with a genuine smile, "it's clearly working wonders for you." She walked around the front of the car and opened the passenger door for me. "So," she asked, her voice soft, "are you ready for a fresh start?" The question felt monumental, heavy with significance, but I nodded, taking a deep breath. "As ready as I'm ever possibly going to be," I replied, sliding into the passenger seat. As we drove through Riverside, the town I had called home for so long, I felt like a complete tourist, seeing it with brand new eyes. Streets I had traveled countless times over the past few decades suddenly seemed to be full of possibilities I had never even noticed before. Karen kept up a gentle, steady stream of conversation, carefully and intuitively avoiding direct questions about Rob or the details of the divorce, for which I was immensely grateful. "I have 3 different places lined up to show you today," she explained as we turned onto Pine Street, a charming tree-lined area known for its older, well-maintained homes and mature trees. "They're all rentals for now. I'm guessing you'll probably want to see how the divorce settlement shakes out financially before you even consider buying anything permanent." "That makes perfect sense, Karen." I agreed, though I hadn't really thought that far ahead yet. The abstract idea of potentially buying a home entirely on my own felt both terrifying and strangely exhilarating. The first property she showed me was a small, quaint bungalow with a deep, inviting front porch and a cheerful yellow front door. "This one has 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, and was just completely renovated last year," Karen explained as she unlocked the door. "The owner is a client of mine who's been transferred to Seattle for work and is looking for a reliable tenant who will take genuinely good care of the place." Inside the house was bright and airy, with beautiful hardwood floors, a cozy living room area, and a compact but nicely updated kitchen. The main bedroom was just large enough to comfortably fit a queen-sized bed and a dresser with a window that looked out onto a small backyard dominated by a magnificent ancient oak tree. The second bedroom was even smaller, barely fitting a desk and a bookshelf, but it was bathed in wonderful morning light. "It's truly lovely, Karen," I said, and I genuinely meant it. "But," Karen prompted, gently hearing the subtle note of hesitation in my voice. I shrugged slightly. It feels like a family home," I explained. "I can almost feel it waiting for children's laughter to echo through its rooms, waiting for someone to build new memories here. And that's just not me anymore. Not right now, anyway." She nodded, her understanding clear in her eyes. "Okay," she said. "Let's try the next one then." The second property was a stylish modern apartment located downtown in a converted historic building, all exposed brick walls and industrial chic design elements. It was undeniably trendy, centrally located, and felt utterly, completely wrong for me the moment I stepped inside. "It's just too cold, Karen," I said simply, and she didn't argue, sensing my feeling immediately. The third property, however, literally caught my breath the moment Karen pulled the car up to the curb outside. It was a beautifully designed in-law suite attached to a gracious, imposing Victorian home on Maple Avenue, complete with its own private entrance and a small, secluded garden patio. The owners, Karen explained, were a retired couple named Eleanor and Henry, who had built the addition specifically for Eleanor's mother, who had sadly passed away 6 months ago. "Eleanor and Henry are very particular about who they rent to," Karen cautioned gently as we walked toward the private entrance. "They're looking for someone quiet, someone who is respectful of privacy, both theirs and their own, but also someone they wouldn't mind occasionally sharing a friendly cup of tea with." The space itself felt perfect the moment I stepped through the door. A generously sized studio with clearly defined areas for living, sleeping, and a compact kitchen cleverly separated not by walls, but by the thoughtful placement of furniture. A large bay window faced east, promising beautiful morning light. The bathroom was surprisingly spacious, featuring a charming clawfoot tub, deep enough for a proper relaxing soak. French doors opened onto the private patio outside, where potted herbs still thrived in the mild autumn weather, their scent faintly in the air. Well, Karen asked softly, watching my face intently for my reaction. "What do you think of this one?" "It feels like possibility, Karen." I said softly, the words a quiet realization. Like I could actually breathe here. Really breathe. We met Eleanor and Henry over a cup of tea in their part of the house. A gracious, formal living room that somehow managed to feel incredibly cozy, despite its high ceilings and antique furniture. They were kind, welcoming, but also direct, asking about my work part-time at the local library, my interests gardening reading, and recently considering taking up watercolor painting, and my reasons for needing a new place to live. At this point, I simply stated, I'm getting divorced after 35 years of marriage. And they both nodded in perfect understanding, their expressions reflecting empathy rather than pity. By the time we left their home later that afternoon, I had signed a 6-month lease agreement beginning the following week, with the option to extend if the arrangement worked well for everyone involved. Wow, I confessed to Karen as we drove toward a local cafe for lunch. That was significantly easier and faster than I ever expected it to be. I honestly thought finding a place would take weeks, navigating listings and viewings. Sometimes, she replied with a warm smile, the universe just aligns things for you perfectly. And sometimes a good realtor just happens to know exactly what her client needs. Over lunch at a small, charming cafe I had never visited before, despite its proximity to the library where I worked, Karen finally asked the question I had been quietly bracing myself for. So, she began gently, her tone inviting rather than probing. What exactly happened, Maggie? If you feel comfortable talking about it, of course. I took a slow sip of my iced tea, deliberately organizing my thoughts and deciding how much I was willing to share. The short version, I said, looking her directly in the eyes. My husband abruptly decided he needed to find himself at the tender age of 62, and my son made it crystal clear that I was an inconvenience when I desperately asked to stay with him after getting the news. Karen winced visibly, a look of sympathy on her face. Oh, Maggie, I'm so sorry. That's incredibly tough. And the long version, I said the words carrying the weight of decades, is that I've spent the past 35 years being a wife and mother who consistently, habitually prioritized absolutely everyone else's needs and desires above my own. And now, I finished, my voice quiet, I'm simply paying the price for that lifetime habit. Maggie. Karen said, her voice firm and filled with conviction. That's not a price you're paying. That is liberation. I looked up, startled by the sheer certainty in her voice, her perspective so different from my own painful framing. I know, she continued, her eyes softening with compassion. It absolutely doesn't feel that way to you right now. It feels like the ground has been violently ripped out from under you, leaving you lost and adrift. But please trust me. When I tell you this a year from now, perhaps even sooner, you will look back on this exact moment, this painful breaking point, as the absolute beginning of the best, most authentic chapter of your entire life. How can you possibly be so sure of that? I asked, my voice filled with doubt and a faint glimmer of hope. Because, she replied simply, her own life, a testament to her words. I've lived it myself. When David abruptly left me for his much younger 28-year-old assistant, I honestly thought my life was completely over. I was 53 years old with adult children who were already busy navigating their own lives, and no real career to speak of, and an identity that was entirely, completely wrapped up in being Mrs. David Harrington. Sound at all familiar, Maggie? I nodded, unable to speak, past the sudden tight lump that had formed in my throat. The first few months were absolute hell. Karen admitted candidly. I cried constantly. I raged against the unfairness of it all. I made some rather questionable decisions that definitely involved copious amounts of box wine and regrettable late-night online shopping purchases. But then, she said, a bright smile breaking through, something truly amazing started to happen. "What?" I whispered, leaning forward, eager to hear. "I remembered who I was," she said, her voice filled with quiet power. "Before I was David's wife. I remembered the woman who had her own dreams, her own strong opinions, and a wonderfully wicked sense of humor. The woman who had always wanted to travel the world to learn to speak Italian fluently, and perhaps someday even start her own small business. And slowly, gradually, I started becoming her again. Or rather becoming a new, evolved version of her, shaped by everything I had experienced. Yes, but absolutely not defined or limited by it." Her words settled over me like a warm, comforting blanket. The mere possibility that this crushing pain I was feeling might eventually somehow lead to something positive and fulfilling seemed incredibly remote, almost impossible to grasp in that moment. But Karen's presence, her vibrant energy, her quiet confidence, her obvious happiness, was undeniable living proof that it was in fact genuinely possible. I can't even imagine feeling that way, Karen. I confessed, the future still feeling so dark and uncertain. "You don't have to imagine it, Maggie," she replied, reaching across the table again to squeeze my hand reassuringly. "You just have to keep actively moving forward, one small tentative step at a time, one single day at a time, until you naturally arrive there." After lunch, Karen kindly drove me to my house, or rather, Rob's, and my house. I corrected myself mentally, a small but significant internal adjustment, so I could collect some essential belongings to tide me over until my official moving day. She offered to come inside with me to help or just for support, but I declined gently. This was something I knew I needed to face alone, to step back into that space and confront the past on my own terms. The house was eerily quiet. When I entered, no sign that Rob had returned since his dramatic departure. Everything was exactly as I had left it in my haste. My coffee mug still sat abandoned in the sink, carelessly tossed there in my distraught departure. A book lay open on the side table next to my favorite reading chair. Mail was stacked neatly on the kitchen counter just as I always left it. I moved slowly through the familiar rooms, seeing them with a strange sense of detachment, with new eyes. This space that had been the literal center of my world for decades suddenly felt like a museum dedicated to someone else's life. The formal living room we had used only for holiday gatherings and special occasions. The kitchen where I had tirelessly prepared thousands upon thousands of meals. The family room where we had watched movies and played board games when the children were still young. Upstairs, I paused in the doorway of our bedroom. Rob's and mine, the large king-sized bed we had purchased 15 years ago, when Rob had complained about my restless sleeping. His side of the bed was perfectly made neat and undisturbed. He had always been far tidier than me. Mine was still rumpled from the last morning I had woken up there. His closet door was neatly closed. Mine was slightly ajar, a sleeve, from a sweater caught in the edge. I moved to my closet and opened it fully, taking in my carefully organized collection of clothes. Who was the woman, I wondered, who wore these sensible slacks, these muted cardigans, these comfortable, practical shoes? Had I always dressed so? Invisibly, I pulled out a suitcase from the back of the closet and began the task of packing, focusing purely on practicalities, enough clothes for maybe 2 weeks, basic toiletries, necessary medications, a few books I was currently reading, my laptop and its charger. In the bathroom, I stared at my reflection in the mirror above the sink. It was the same face that had looked back at me in the hotel room, but somehow subtly different. Less shocked perhaps, less utterly devastated. Not healed, not even close to being healed, but present, here, surviving. As I was zipping up the suitcase, securing its contents, I suddenly heard the front door of the house open and then close downstairs. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. Then Rob's voice calling up the stairs. "Maggie, are you here? Your car is in the driveway outside." My heart hammered frantically in my chest. I wasn't ready for this confrontation, hadn't prepared myself for seeing him. Hadn't thought about what I would say, but there was clearly no avoiding it now. "I'm up here," I called back, my voice surprisingly steady strong. His footsteps ascended the stairs. Then he appeared in the doorway of the bedroom, looking disheveled and tired, his usual composure visibly frayed. He had always been handsome in a distinguished way, his salt and pepper hair, which had been more salt than pepper for years, his kind blue eyes behind rimless glasses, a trim build maintained through regular tennis games. But now he looked older, somehow diminished by the events of the past weeks. "Emily said you were coming by to get some things," he said, his eyes falling immediately on the suitcase on the bed. How are you doing, Maggie?" The unexpected note of genuine concern in his voice, despite everything, sparked an immediate unexpected flare of anger within me. "How do you think I am doing, Rob?" I retorted the words, sharp and biting. My husband of 35 years abruptly walked out on me without any warning, and my son rejected me when I needed him most. I'm just absolutely peachy, aren't I? He flinched visibly, rubbing a hand wearily over his face. "I know this is incredibly hard for you, Maggie. I never ever wanted to hurt you like this. What did you honestly think was going to happen?" I challenged him, my voice rising. "Did you actually believe I would just thank you profusely for setting me free? Congratulate you heartily on your courage in abandoning our life? I thought you would understand," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Deep down, I honestly thought you must feel it too. The emptiness, the profound sense that there simply had to be more to life than this comfortable, predictable routine we had somehow fallen into." His words hit closer to home than I cared to admit, echoing my own recent painful realizations about the loneliness within our marriage. But that, I reminded myself fiercely, did not in any way excuse his actions. "The difference, Rob," I said, my voice tight with barely controlled emotion, "is that I made a commitment to work through the hard times, to face the emptiness, the stagnation, together. If that's what we were truly feeling. I accused, my voice gaining strength. "You decided to solve your midlife crisis by simply blowing up our entire life together without even giving me a chance to be a part of the conversation, a part of the decision." "It's not a midlife crisis," he protested weakly. "What exactly would you call it then, Rob?" I demanded. "Suddenly deciding at 62 years old that you need to completely find yourself, abandoning everything you've built. Please?" He sighed heavily, leaning against the door frame, looking utterly defeated. "I've been unhappy for a very long time, Maggie. Years. I honestly tried to talk to you about it, really. I did, but you were always so incredibly busy with the kids, with your committees, with keeping absolutely everything running perfectly and smoothly. There never seemed to be any space, any time for my feelings, for my needs." The accusation stung deeply, partly because there was perhaps a small grain of uncomfortable truth to it. I had been busy, had perhaps even used that busyness consciously or unconsciously to avoid deeper, more complex issues within our marriage. "You could have tried harder, Rob," I said, but the fight was slowly draining out of me, replaced by a profound weariness. You could have insisted that we talk, that we get counseling, something. Instead, you just gave up on us. Maybe I did give up, Maggie. He admitted, his voice barely audible. Maybe that just makes me a coward. But I simply couldn't face the thought of another 10, 15, 20 years of this quiet desperation, of waking up every single day feeling like I was living someone else's life, not my own. We stood in silence for a long moment, the heavy weight of decades of shared history and unspoken resentments hanging between us. Finally, I zipped up the suitcase and lifted it off the bed. "I've found a place to live, Rob," I told him, my voice calm and decisive. "I'll be moving in sometime next week. In the meantime, I'm staying with a friend." It was a small white lie. I was, of course, returning to the hotel, but it allowed me to maintain a crucial sense of dignity and control. "You don't have to leave the house." "Maggie," Rob said quickly, a note of desperation in his voice. "This is your home too. I'm the one who should go, who should have left." "This hasn't been my home for a very long time, Rob," I replied, echoing the sentiment I had shared with James. "It's just a house where I lived for many years." He looked visibly pained by my words. "Maggie, I need to go," I said, moving past him toward the stairs, suitcase in hand. "Wait, Maggie," he called out after me, his voice urgent. "We need to talk about the practical things. The house, the finances, the divorce process itself. I've already spoken to a mediator who specializes in amicable separations. She could meet with both of us sometime next week." I paused on the landing, turning back to look at him. "Amicable," I repeated, a bitter smile touching my lips. "Is that honestly what you think this is? Rob amicable. I'm hoping it can be Maggie," he said, and I could see the genuine hope reflected in his eyes. "For both our sakes, for the sake of our children." "I'll think about it, Rob," I said, finally offering him that much. "Text me the details of the mediator and I'll let you know what I decide." As I drove away from the house, leaving behind decades of memories packed into boxes in my car, I felt a complex mixture of emotions I couldn't quite sort through. Relief at having survived the first face-to-face confrontation with him. Anger still simmering just beneath the surface. A surprising, unexpected tinge of empathy for Rob, who was clearly struggling and in pain in his own way. And beneath all of it, a quiet, fierce determination that felt entirely new and powerful. Karen had generously invited me to stay with her until I could officially move into the in-law suite, but I had politely declined, choosing instead to return to the anonymity and neutral space of the Riverside Inn. I needed the solitude, the quiet privacy, the freedom to fall apart completely, if necessary, without having to worry about being a good guest or inconveniencing someone else. That evening, I opened my laptop for the very first time since my world had violently shifted on its axis. Dozens of emails awaited me, most of them completely insignificant sales announcements from stores, various newsletters, updates from the different committees I served on. But one email immediately caught my eye, a reminder from the community center about the watercolor class I had impulsively signed up for months ago and had then promptly forgotten all about. The class was scheduled to start the very next evening. On a sudden impulse, I replied to the email to confirm my attendance. Then I checked my online banking account, relieved to see that Rob had not emptied our joint accounts. In fact, he had deposited his most recent paycheck as usual. At least I wouldn't have to worry about money immediately. I made a mental note to open my own separate bank account very soon and transfer what I considered my fair share of our joint savings. My phone rang just as I was scrolling through restaurant delivery options online, feeling far too tired to contemplate going out for dinner alone. James's name lit up the screen. I considered letting it go directly to voicemail, then decided against it. It was time to start practicing those newly established boundaries. "Hello, James," I said, my voice neutral. "Mom." His voice was hesitant, unsure. "How are you really doing?" "I'm managing James," I replied, my tone neither hostile nor particularly warm. "What can I do for you?" The formality in my voice clearly caught him off guard. I just wanted to check in on you, see if you needed anything at all." "That's thoughtful of you, James," I said calmly, "but I'm fine. I've actually found a new place to live and I'll be moving in next week." "Moving, Mom? Don't you think you might be rushing into things a little too quickly? You and Dad might still be able to work things out between you." I almost laughed aloud at the sheer naivety of his assumption. "That's not going to happen, James," I stated clearly. "And even if by some unforeseen miracle it somehow did, I would still want my own place. This separation has made some things incredibly clear to me." "What things, Mom?" His voice had taken on a defensive edge once again. "That I have spent far too long defining myself solely through other people's needs and expectations," I explained patiently. "That it is long past time for me to figure out who I truly am and what I want from my life." "But this doesn't sound like you at all, Mom," he protested, echoing Emily's earlier comment. "Maybe," I said calmly, "it doesn't sound like the mother you have always known, the one who always put everyone else first. But it sounds exactly like the woman I am in the process of becoming." There was a pause on his end. Then, "Vanessa and I were talking about the other night. We both feel absolutely terrible about how things happened. We really want to make it up to you, Mom. Come over for dinner this Saturday. We can actually talk properly then, and you can see the nursery we've been setting up. Vanessa's parents actually went home yesterday. The invitation was, I recognized a clear peace offering, but it came with an unspoken, ingrained expectation that I would simply slip back into my usual familiar role, the accommodating mother, the doting future grandmother, the woman who never made waves or dared to demand that her own needs be prioritized. I genuinely appreciate the invitation, James," I said carefully, choosing my words deliberately. "But I'm afraid I'm simply not available this Saturday." "Oh," he said, his surprise evident in his voice. "Okay. Well, what about Sunday then? Are you free on Sunday?" "I'm not available on Sunday either, James," I replied softly but firmly. "Mom," he said, a note of frustration creeping into his voice. Are you punishing me for the other night? Because that's honestly not fair. I already explained to you that it was just genuinely bad timing for us. And there it was, the ingrained assumption that my unavailability, my decision to prioritize myself, could only be explained as a petty retaliatory response to his rejection rather than a genuine, necessary step in caring for my own well-being and honoring my own schedule. "I am not punishing you, James," I said, keeping my voice steady and calm. "I am simply establishing necessary boundaries. When I am ready and able to visit you, I will let you know. In the meantime, I wish you and Vanessa well with the pregnancy. I am genuinely happy for both of you." "So," he said, his voice tight with resentment, "you're just going to completely shut us out then, your own family?" "No, James," I corrected him patiently. "I am creating space for myself to heal and to rebuild my life on a new foundation. There is a significant difference between those two things." "Dad was right about you," he muttered under his breath, though loud enough for me to hear clearly. You're not yourself anymore." The comment stung, but I refused to let it derail my newfound resolve, my fragile sense of self. "Your father," I said quietly, my voice firm, "doesn't know who I am anymore. I'm not entirely sure he ever truly did. And with all due respect, James, neither do you." After we hung up the phone, I sat on the hotel bed, my heart racing from the difficult conversation. Had I been too harsh, perhaps? But the conversation had undeniably confirmed what I had been realizing over the past few days, that my relationships, particularly with the male figures in my life, had been built on a fundamentally uneven foundation, with me always expected to bend to accommodate, to put everyone else's needs and feelings first. No more, I vowed silently. It was long past time for reciprocity, time for mutual respect, time for genuine heartfelt connection, rather than purely obligatory interactions dictated solely by inherited familial roles. I ordered some delicious Thai food from a local place I had always wanted to try, but Rob had previously dismissed as too exotic. Watched a fascinating documentary about female artists navigating their later years, and fell asleep without setting an alarm once again. The next morning, I drove directly to the bank and confidently opened my own separate checking and savings accounts, transferring half of our joint savings into them and setting up direct deposit for my library paychecks. The banker who assisted me, a kind young woman named Tara, was efficient, professional, and completely non-judgmental when I briefly explained my situation. "You are absolutely doing the right thing," she assured me with a supportive smile. "Financial independence is incredibly crucial in situations like yours for your peace of mind." Next, feeling empowered, I visited my doctor's office to get my own health insurance sorted out, rather than continuing as a dependent on Rob's policy. And then, feeling a surge of unexpected boldness, I stopped at a hair salon I had passed hundreds of times but had never dared to enter. "I want something completely different," I told the stylist, a creative young man with an artistic flair, clearly evident in his own expertly colored hair. "Something that feels like me." He studied my face in the mirror, then looked at my hair, shoulder length, conservatively styled, highlighted every 6 weeks, at the same place Rob's sister had originally recommended decades ago. "And who exactly is you?" he asked gently, his eyes meeting mine in the reflection. "I'm still honestly figuring that part out," I admitted, a small smile forming on my lips. He smiled back, a genuine, encouraging smile. "Perfect," he said. "Then let's create some possibilities, shall we?" 2 hours later, I emerged from the salon with a chic, modern bob haircut that beautifully framed my face in a way that made my cheekbones appear more pronounced, my eyes more striking and noticeable. The color was richer, warmer than before, with subtle copper highlights that caught the light beautifully whenever I moved my head. I looked different. I looked visible, present, impossible to ignore. On impulse, I stopped at a small clothing boutique on my way back to the hotel, drawn in by a window display featuring a mannequin wearing a vibrant teal-colored dress. Inside, I found myself gravitating instinctively toward colors and styles I had always admired from afar, but had never ever considered me. Fitted jackets in rich jewel tones like emerald and sapphire silk scarves, with bold artistic patterns, a pair of ankle boots with just enough heel to add a confident, subtle lift to my stride. A friendly saleswoman approached me as I was tentatively fingering a soft cashmere sweater in a shade of deep plum I would never have considered before. "That color would be absolutely beautiful with your complexion and your new hair, ma'am," she commented warmly. You really think so?" I asked, a touch of doubt in my voice. "It's not too much?" She looked at me with genuine surprise. "Too much?" she echoed. "Absolutely not. It's perfect on you. Sophisticated, yes, but also full of personality. Exactly like you. Her simple words, exactly like you, lingered in my mind as I made my purchases and returned to the hotel. Exactly like me. But who was that exactly? I was still figuring it out piece by piece, choice by choice. That evening I arrived at the community center for the watercolor class, feeling a complex mixture of nervousness and exhilaration. I had changed into one of my new purchases, the plum sweater paired with simple black pants and the ankle boots, and caught sight of myself in the reflective glass doors of the center as I approached. The woman looking back at me in the reflection seemed simultaneously familiar and completely foreign. The class was small, just 8 students ranging in age from a young college student to a distinguished elderly gentleman who introduced himself as Arthur, a retired English professor. The instructor, Maya, was a serene, calm woman in her 40s, with paint-splattered jeans and a wonderfully relaxed, encouraging teaching style that immediately put me at ease. Watercolor, Maya explained softly as we arranged our materials on the tables, is ultimately about surrender. You can attempt to guide the paint, you can suggest a direction or a shape, but ultimately water does what water wants to do. The true magic happens when you learn to work with its unpredictable nature rather than trying to fight against it. As we began our very first exercise, simply exploring how the water and pigment interacted and bloomed on the paper, I found myself becoming deeply absorbed in the process. The beautiful way colors would bloom and blend on the page, the unpredictable fluid beauty of water finding its own unique path across the surface of the paper. There was a metaphor there, I realized, about my own life taking unexpected, unplanned turns, about finding unexpected beauty and possibility in the unplanned, uncontrolled chaos of life. You have a surprisingly natural sensitivity to the medium, Maggie, Maya commented, pausing briefly behind me to observe my work. Your touch is light, gentle, but also intentional. That's quite rare to see in absolute beginners. The compliment warmed me a quiet, unexpected pleasure. When was the last time I wondered that someone had genuinely praised me for something that was purely about me, about my own innate ability or talent, not about what I did for others or how well I performed a role? After class, Arthur, the retired English professor, invited several of us to join him for coffee at the cafe located right next door to the community center. Surprisingly, I found myself accepting his invitation without a moment's hesitation. The old Maggie would have instantly rushed home, feeling obligated to make sure Rob had dinner, to tidy up the house, to squeeze in a load of laundry before bed. But Rob wasn't waiting for me. The house wasn't mine to tidy anymore, and the only laundry I had to worry about was my own small bag of clothes, safely back at the hotel. The conversation flowed easily and naturally as we sipped our drinks and shared brief stories about what had initially brought each of us to the watercolor class. Arthur had taken it up after the death of his beloved wife 2 years ago, finding solace and quiet comfort in the careful, focused attention it required. Jenna, the college student, was an architecture major who wanted to develop her rendering skills in a more traditional medium. And Luis, a kind nurse who worked at Riverside General Hospital, was there on his therapist's recommendation as a stress management technique. When it was my turn to share, I hesitated for only a moment, then decided on complete honesty, a new habit I was cultivating. My husband left me suddenly, 3 days ago, ending our 35-year marriage. I explained, my voice steady. And my son made it very clear that I was simply not a priority in his life when I needed him most. So, I'm in the process of rebuilding, figuring out who I am now when I'm not defined solely by other people's expectations or needs. The silence that followed my confession wasn't awkward or filled with pity, but rather it felt respectful, a quiet acknowledgement of my vulnerability and courage. Then Arthur the professor slowly raised his coffee cup in a small, quiet salute. "To new beginnings, Maggie," he said simply, his eyes kind. "To new beginnings." We all echoed softly in unison, lifting our own cups. And in that simple moment, surrounded by strangers who asked absolutely nothing of me but my presence, I felt the very first fragile spark of genuine hope that life after devastation might hold unexpected joys, new connections, and possibilities I couldn't yet fully see. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt entirely unlike my previous life, a gentle unfolding cadence of discovery and quiet joy. November arrived, bringing with it crisp, clear mornings and golden afternoons, the kind of light that seems to illuminate the entire world with a warm amber glow. I settled into routines of my own creation, mornings spent writing in a journal at my small desk as the sun slowly rose, attending watercolor class diligently on Wednesday evenings, and expanding my volunteer hours at the library to include leading a book club, specifically for seniors, a role I unexpectedly found deeply fulfilling. My little in-law suite began to transform from a somewhat blank canvas into a true reflection of myself, my personality, my evolving tastes. I hung art on the walls that genuinely spoke to me, not the bland landscapes Rob had preferred, but vivid, expressive abstracts and striking black and white photographs of distant, intriguing places I now dared to hope I might someday visit. Eleanor, my kind landlady, taught me how to propagate houseplants, and soon my windowsills were adorned with tiny green tendrils stretching confidently toward the light. I adopted a senior cat from the local shelter, a dignified, fluffy orange tabby named Oscar, who immediately claimed the comfortable reading chair as his own, leaving me to sit cross-legged on the floor beside him, while he graciously permitted occasional ear scratches and purred contentedly. Through it all, I consciously maintained my boundaries, keeping them gentle but undeniably firm. Rob called regularly, his voice sounding steadier and less strained each time, his therapist apparently helping him to untangle the complex midlife knots that had driven him to such drastic, impulsive action. We spoke amicably, even respectfully, about purely practical matters related to the separation, paying bills, preparing for taxes in the coming year, the logistics of the divorce process itself, which neither of us seemed particularly eager to rush, but which remained a quiet underlying presence in our conversations. James and Vanessa invited me to dinner at their farmhouse twice during this period. The first visit felt strained, the conversation halting and uncertain, all of us acutely aware of the shifting ground beneath our relationships, the unspoken history, and recent pain. The second visit was noticeably easier, perhaps because Vanessa's pregnancy had progressed enough to give us all a more neutral, joyful focus, her small visible baby bump prompting animated discussions of potential names and nursery colors rather than dwelling on past family fractures. Emily, my daughter, proved to be the greatest, most wonderful surprise of this entire period. Rather than pulling away as I had somewhat feared she might, she actively leaned in, visiting frequently, sometimes bringing her children, but often coming alone just to be with me. We talked truly, deeply, talked in a way we never had before, about everything from the subtle complexities of her own marriage, which I learned was much stronger and more resilient than I had realized, to her career ambitions, which were far larger and more ambitious than she had ever openly admitted before, to her own burgeoning questions about her identity beyond being a mother and wife. "I always just saw you as Mom," she confessed one evening, as we shared a bottle of wine on my tiny, charming patio under the soft glow of the string lights I had hung along the fence. It honestly never occurred to me, not really, that you might have had your own regrets, your own dreams, your own life that existed beyond just us kids. Not regrets exactly, Emily, I corrected, gently choosing my words with care. Just paths not taken, perhaps. Roads not traveled. We all have them to some degree. She tilted her head slightly, studying me intently in the soft light. You know, Mom, she said, her voice quiet, filled with genuine observation. You actually seem happier now, even with everything that has happened, everything you've lost. The observation caught me completely off guard, making me pause and truly consider it. Was I happier? The answer, when it came, surprised me with its sudden, undeniable clarity. I am Emily. I admitted, a soft smile forming on my lips. Not because my marriage ended, certainly not that, or because my entire life was completely upended, but because I finally gave myself permission to matter, to myself, to actively prioritize my own needs and desires. And I had. That, I realized, was the true profound transformation of these past weeks. Not just the external changes to my appearance or my living situation, significant as they were, but the deep internal shift that placed my own inherent needs, my own long-buried desires, on equal footing with everyone else's for the very first time. But life, I was learning, doesn't allow for simple linear progress. It has a way of circling back, of testing your resolve, of offering up new, unexpected challenges, just when a fragile sense of equilibrium finally seems within reach. That test arrived on a crisp Tuesday morning in early December, precisely 6 weeks to the day after Rob had walked out of the house, out of our shared life. I was preparing to visit the house. Our house. I reminded myself, though, the possessive felt increasingly foreign to finally collect more of my belongings. Things that weren't strictly necessities but held personal meaning. The divorce proceedings had officially begun paperwork, filed by our respective attorneys, the process proceeding civilly, if somewhat somberly. Although Rob and I communicated regularly about practical matters, we had carefully avoided being in the same physical space, both of us apparently intuitively sensing that such an encounter would be emotionally complicated, perhaps even fraught. I had arranged to go to the house while he was at work, giving myself the privacy and space to sort through decades of accumulated possessions without an audience, without his presence. But as I pulled into the familiar driveway that morning, his car sat in its usual spot. My heart sank immediately, even as a flash of irritation flared. Had he simply forgotten our arrangement, or had he deliberately ignored it, choosing to be here? For a moment, I seriously considered simply backing out of the driveway and rescheduling for another day. But the thought of prolonging this task, already postponed multiple times due to my emotional reluctance, made me square my shoulders, take a deep breath, and approach the front door. I still had a key, of course, but it felt wrong, fundamentally wrong, to use it. This wasn't my home anymore, not in the way it had been. I knocked. Rob answered the door almost immediately, as if he had been standing right there on the other side, waiting for my arrival. He looked different, healthier certainly than during his apartment breakdown, but changed in more subtle ways. He had a new haircut, shorter and more current than his decades-old style, and he was wearing casual clothes, not the usual business attire or weekend golf shirts that had constituted his entire wardrobe for as long as I could remember. "Maggie," he said, and something in the way he spoke my name, not with possession, not with expectation, but with a kind of careful, almost tentative respect, caught me completely off guard. "You were supposed to be at work today, Rob," I said, unable to keep a note of accusation from my voice. "I took the day off," he replied quietly, meeting my gaze. I thought we should talk. Really talk this time, Maggie. In person. I hesitated on the doorstep, torn between my annoyance at his unexpected presence and presumption, and my recognition of the sheer inevitability of this moment. Sooner or later, we were going to have to face each other properly, outside the safety of phone calls or texts. I came to collect some more of my things today, I stated, holding my ground. I know, he said gently, and you absolutely can. But maybe we could have coffee together first. I just made a fresh pot. The invitation was offered without any pressure, presented as a simple option. I was entirely free to decline. That more than anything made me nod slowly and step inside the house. The space felt simultaneously achingly familiar and strangely foreign, like returning to a childhood home many years after having moved away. Everything was exactly as I remembered it, every object in its usual place. Yet my own perspective had shifted so profoundly in the intervening weeks that nothing looked quite the same to me anymore. Rob led me to the kitchen, which had always been the warm, bustling heart of our home, and poured coffee into my favorite mug without even asking. The small, unconscious gesture of remembrance touched me unexpectedly, a quiet echo of a shared past. You look well, Maggie, he said, as we sat down at the breakfast nook where we had shared thousands of meals together over the years, raising our children, navigating daily life. More than well, actually. You look vibrant. Thank you, Rob, I replied, cradling the warm mug in my hands. You seem better, too. Different. He nodded, running a hand self-consciously through his newly cropped hair. Therapy is helping, he admitted honestly. And time. And he hesitated for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Perspective. A lot of perspective on what I so carelessly threw away, and on why I felt compelled to do it in the first place. He gazed out the window toward the backyard, where the rose bushes I had lovingly tended for years stood dormant skeletal against the early winter chill. Do you remember? He asked the question, seemingly random. Our 10th anniversary trip to that charming bed and breakfast up in Vermont. The memory was distant, but I nodded, remembering. Of course I remember, Rob. It was autumn. The fall foliage was spectacular, absolutely breathtaking. We took that hike up to the ridge that day. He continued, a faint smile touching his lips. It was longer and more challenging than we had expected, and you were worried about getting back down before it got dark. But when we finally reached the top, the view, miles and miles of forests in every single shade of red and gold imaginable. I finished softly, the image vivid in my mind. You said something to me that day. Something I've never forgotten. You said, sometimes, Maggie, you simply have to climb higher than you're comfortable with, just to be able to see how vast the world truly is, how much is really out there. He turned back to me, then his eyes holding mine, acknowledging my words. I've been thinking about that day a lot lately, he said, his voice low and reflective. About how I've spent my entire adult life essentially living down in the valley, head down, following the established comfortable path, work, home, family obligations round and round, in what felt like endless circles, never actually climbing high enough to truly see what else might be out there for me, what I was missing. He sighed, a sound of deep introspection. My therapist helped me to see that I wasn't really trying to escape you when I left Maggie. I was desperately trying to escape the suffocating smallness of the life I had inadvertently created for myself. The narrowness of my focus, the overwhelming predictability of it all. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But I went about it all wrong, didn't I? Instead of impulsively destroying what we had built together, I should have talked to you openly, honestly. I should have asked you if you felt it too, that sense of confinement, that yearning for something more. I did feel it, Rob. I admitted quietly, the truth finally spoken aloud. In some ways, yes, I did. But my response wasn't to blow up our life without warning. It was to keep going, to find meaning and purpose in the perceived smallness, in the daily acts of caring for the people I loved most in the world. Until you couldn't anymore. He observed gently, his tone not accusatory, but understanding. Until I essentially forced your hand by leaving. I considered this for a moment. Perhaps, I said, looking at him, perhaps I genuinely needed that push, Rob. Perhaps we both did, in our own ways. A comfortable silence settled between us, not awkward, but weighted with unspoken history and tentative new possibilities. Why did you really want to talk today, Rob? I finally asked, breaking the silence. What has truly changed for you? He leaned forward slightly in his seat, his expression open, earnest. I've been doing a tremendous amount of thinking over these past weeks, Maggie. A lot of hard reflection on what went so wrong between us, on what I genuinely want moving forward in my life. And I've realized something incredibly important. And what is that, Rob? I prompted softly. That I don't want to be married to the woman you were pretending to be just to make me comfortable. He said, his gaze steady, unwavering. I want to genuinely know the woman you actually are, the woman you are becoming. He gestured toward me, encompassing the visible changes, the subtle shifts he clearly perceived. This Maggie, the one with her own strong opinions, with her clear boundaries, with a vibrant life that she is actively building for herself. The declaration caught me completely off guard, rendering me momentarily speechless. I had mentally prepared myself for pleas for reconciliation, based purely on nostalgia, on the comfort of the familiar, on regret for a lost past. I had not anticipated this profound recognition of my transformation, this unexpected embrace of the very changes that had initially seemed to threaten him so deeply. You don't even know who I am becoming, Rob, I said carefully, my voice filled with surprise and uncertainty. I barely know myself yet. That's precisely it, Maggie. He replied, a new energy animating his features, a quiet enthusiasm I hadn't seen in years. I want to find out. Not necessarily as your husband anymore, perhaps just as someone who deeply cares about you. Someone who genuinely wants to see you flourish and thrive rather than diminish yourself. The sincerity in his voice was palpable. He wasn't asking for anything transactional, no promises of return, nothing beyond the simple opportunity to witness my journey, to be a part of it in some small, undefined capacity. The answer disarmed me completely. It acknowledged my autonomy, respected the difficult path I was navigating, asked for nothing beyond the chance to be a witness, a friend. I'd like that, Rob. I found myself saying the word, surprising even myself. Friendship. That's entirely new territory for us, isn't it? Relief visibly softened his features, easing the tension in his shoulders. Thank you, Maggie, he said quietly. Thank you for even considering it. We finished our coffee together, the conversation gradually shifting to lighter, more relaxed topics. Some of the insights he had gained in therapy, my progress in the watercolor class news of James and Vanessa, and their impending parenthood. When we drained our mugs, I stood up knowing it was time to move on to the task that had originally brought me here. I should really start sorting through my things, Rob, I said, gesturing toward the rooms upstairs. I didn't bring many boxes with me today, so I'll just focus on collecting the absolute essentials. Let me help you. he offered immediately, then quickly added, sensing my potential hesitation. Or not. Whatever makes you feel most comfortable, Maggie. Truly. I considered his offer for a moment. Working together would undoubtedly be more efficient physically, and perhaps it might serve as a practical test of this tentative new friendship we were proposing. You can help Rob, I decided, meeting his gaze. But please understand, this doesn't change anything about the divorce proceedings. Not yet, anyway. I still need that legal clarity, that separation, while we figure out whatever this new dynamic might be. He nodded, accepting the boundary I had clearly set without any protest. Understood, Maggie, he said. I respect that. We spent the remainder of the afternoon moving methodically through the house, side by side, carefully boxing my books, my mother's precious china photograph albums that chronicled our shared history and the various smaller treasures that held deep personal meaning for me alone. Rob worked alongside me with surprising sensitivity and quiet attentiveness, never questioning my choices about what to keep or leave behind, offering physical help when needed, but otherwise giving me the necessary space to process the immense emotional weight of dismantling a shared life carefully curated over decades. By late afternoon, my car was filled with carefully packed boxes, and I was physically and emotionally exhausted. We stood together in the driveway in the fading winter light, an awkward moment of uncertainty hanging between us, the past literally boxed up around us. Thank you, Rob, I said simply, genuinely, for your help today, and for... I gestured vaguely with my hand, unable to fully articulate the complex mix of appreciation and surprise I felt at his unexpected evolution, his willingness to engage with me in a new, respectful way. Thank you, Maggie. He replied, his hands in his pockets, his posture relaxed but tentative, for giving me even this small chance to show you who I might become, even if it's just as your friend. I nodded, suddenly feeling overwhelmed by the emotional currents of the day. I should go now, Rob. Of course, Maggie. He stepped back slightly, giving me space. Maggie? He said, his voice softening, a hopeful note creeping in. Would you consider having dinner with me sometime next week? At that new place downtown everyone's been talking about. Just two friends catching up. The invitation hung in the crisp evening air between us, a fragile bridge to possibility, without any demand or expectation attached. A month ago, in the immediate aftermath of his departure, I might have instantly seen it as a trap, a calculated attempt to pull me back into old, comfortable patterns. Now standing here feeling secure and grounded in my fragile new sense of self, it felt like an opportunity to continue this careful, cautious exploration of what might possibly be. I'd like that, Rob, I said, my voice quiet but firm. Dinner. Text me the details. As I drove away from the house, my car filled with carefully packed boxes of my past, I felt a curious lightness, not the giddy relief of a problem solved or a final decision made, but the expansive, open-ended possibility of a path not yet fully defined. Rob and I might find our way back to each other in some entirely new configuration, or we might not. The unexpected beauty I realized was in the very uncertainty of it, in the exhilarating freedom to discover what lay ahead, rather than being bound by rigid expectation or bitter presumption. That evening, back in my cozy little sanctuary, I carefully unpacked my mother's china, arranging it with quiet reverence in the small cabinet Eleanor and Henry had kindly helped me refinish and position. The delicate floral pattern of the china, once reserved for formal holidays and very special occasions, seemed different in this new context. No longer just precious heirlooms to be carefully protected and displayed, but beautiful, cherished objects meant to be genuinely enjoyed and used daily. Oscar, my rescue cat, watched from his regal perch on the reading chair, his tail twitching with mild feline judgment, as I rearranged my modest space to accommodate these tangible treasures from my past. When I finally settled beside him, scratching under his chin in the exact spot he preferred, my phone chimed with an incoming text message from Emily. "The kids made something special for your new place. Mom, can we stop by this weekend to deliver it and see your new home?" I smiled warmly, typing back immediately. "Of course, darling. I would absolutely love that. Just let me know when works best." Another chime, this time from James. "Vanessa's ultrasound appointment tomorrow at 2:00 p.m. It would honestly mean a lot to both of us if you could possibly come, Mom." The invitation, so open and without reservation, touched me deeply. Not an obligation or a reluctant expectation, but a genuine desire to actively include me in a significant, joyful moment in their lives. "I'll be there, James," I replied, my heart feeling full. Setting down my phone, I gazed slowly around my small but perfect space. The watercolors I had painted vibrant and expressive, now hanging proudly on the walls. Oscar purring contentedly beside me, cherished objects from my past, now thoughtfully integrated into my present invitations to be an active part of my children's futures, waiting patiently to be fulfilled. Only 6 weeks ago, I had sat utterly alone in my car outside James and Vanessa's house, feeling completely lost and adrift, convinced my life was over. I had lost my husband, lost my home, lost my ingrained sense of place and purpose in the world. What I couldn't possibly see then, what I was only just beginning to truly understand now, was that those devastating losses had in fact cleared the ground, creating fertile space for something entirely new and unexpected to grow. Not a smaller, diminished life as I had feared, but a larger, more expansive one. Not an existence defined solely by absence and loss, but one enriched and expanded by presence. My own fully realized, vibrant presence in every moment, every choice, every evolving relationship. Outside, the very first snow of winter had begun to fall, delicate, silent flakes, illuminated like tiny diamonds by the streetlights outside my window. I watched them dance and twirl in the darkness, each one unique, each one adding to the slow, quiet transformation of the familiar landscape outside. By morning, the world would look different, familiar contours softened and beautifully reshaped by the gentle accumulation of these tiny individual changes. Just as I had been, the thought brought a quiet smile to my lips and a profound sense of peace to my heart. Whatever came next, reconciliation or permanent separation from Rob, deepened healthier connections with my children, or the continued navigation of our complex evolving relationships, the forging of new friendships, or the rekindling of cherished old ones, I would face it confidently and authentically as myself. Not the self I had been before that fateful evening, when my life felt like it had imploded, but the self I was actively discovering and courageously building day by day, choice by choice, complete, sufficient, and whole within myself at last. Up next, we've carefully selected 2 more standout stories that we think you'll absolutely love, presented right here on your screen. If this story deeply resonated with you or hit the mark, you definitely won't want to pass these other ones up. Simply click and check them out when you're ready.